Hey guys, tonight we descend into the bowels of history literally. The air is thick, the light dim, and under your feet, a squelch that tells you this journey isn't going to be glamorous. You're holding a pail, a rusted shovel, and a flickering candle that's doing its best not to quit on you. Welcome to the life of a gong farmer, a medieval term that basically translates to you clean human waste for a living. Not with gloves, not with machines, just your two hands, questionable shoes, and a whole lot of resolve. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see who else is out there in the stillness. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the sticky alley behind the tavern, dragging a wooden cart with two large barrels each sloshing with the not-so-fragrant evidence of last night's feast. Medieval cities are charming, sure, with their stone cathedrals and cobbled streets. But what lies beneath? That's your kingdom. And trust me, no one wants your crown. By day, the streets bustle with bakers, blacksmiths, and fishmongers. By night, you slip into the shadows, lifting heavy lids off cesspits, those deep, foul-smelling holes beneath latrines, and begin your sacred task, removing the waste before it overflows into the street, and, eventually, into people's food. You descend with your tools, a wooden scoop, a leather apron, barely helps, and a thin rope ladder, candle clenched in your teeth. The air grows thicker the deeper you go. You try not to breathe, but eventually you have to. And that's when it hits you. The smell. Imagine 10 years of outhouse leftovers, stew remnants, sickness, rot, and whatever people think they can flush away in a world without plumbing. One wrong step, and you're in it. Literally. You pray for solid footing, and even then, your boots fill with something that once came out of someone else. It seeps in, warm and unforgiving, and you haven't even started scooping yet. Still, the job has perks. Sort of. Gong farmers, as much as people despised their smell, were actually paid reasonably well for their trouble, at least more than the average field labourer. In some cities, they were among the few peasants who could afford their own homes. Of course, no one visited those homes. You might get paid, but you'd never get invited to a feast, a wedding, or even just to stand downwind. Here's a fun little fringe fact for you. Some medieval folks believed that ammonia-rich human waste could be used for cleaning clothes. So while you're scooping it out by the gallon, someone else is soaking a tunic in it across town, swearing by its whitening power. Clean, they said. Just don't ask how. Historians still argue whether gong farmers were forced into the job or volunteered for it. Some records suggest entire families did it for generations, while others point to debtors being punished with a lifetime in the pits. Either way, no one's dream job started with, "I hope I one day handle the town's poop with my bare hands." And it wasn't just cesspits. Chamber pots, those lovely portable toilets people kept in their bedrooms, had to be emptied too. And that was often your job as well. You'd walk door to door, collecting sloshing pots from upstairs windows, the contents sometimes spilling onto your cloak mid-transfer. If you're lucky, the residents call out before tossing the pot's contents out the window. If not, well, let's just say your hat takes the brunt. Even the word gong is a charming mislead. It comes from the Old English gang, meaning to go. So you're not the sound of a ceremonial bell. You're just the guy who cleans up the going. And you do it silently, because no one wants to talk to you. Kids throw stones. Bakers refuse you bread. Priests avoid eye contact. You live like a ghost during the day, and only find purpose under the cloak of moonlight. But occasionally, just occasionally, you find something unexpected down there. Rings, coins, teeth. Yes, teeth that slipped off or out and into the void. A few gong farmers made decent extra money selling their finds back to desperate owners or at local markets. One infamous case from York records a farmer who found a bishop's ring and held it for ransom. Not the saintliest of acts, but hey, after the night he had, he earned it. You pull yourself out of the pit, sweat mixing with other things. Your back aches, your knees crack, but you've still got 2 more houses before dawn. The streets are quiet now, just the echo of your footsteps and the faint slosh in your barrel. The city never thanks you, but they definitely notice when you stop. You wade into the swamp just after dawn, fog curling around your ankles like curious fingers. The water's cold, too, cold for comfort, but that's not your biggest problem. It's what lives in the water that earns you your daily crust of bread. Tiny, wriggling, hungry creatures. You are a leech collector, and you are breakfast. With a stick in one hand and your trousers rolled to the knees, you take a slow step forward, then another. The mud sucks at your soles. You mutter something halfway between a prayer and a complaint, then pause. It only takes a moment. 1 minute, your legs are yours. The next, they're hosting half a dozen blood-sucking passengers. Your job isn't to scream. Your job is to stand there, calmly, while the leeches feast. Hospitals, if you can even call them that in medieval times, pay good coin for these slippery vampires. Bloodletting is one of the great medical practices of the age, based on the belief that sickness comes from imbalances in your humours. Got a fever? Leeches. A headache? Leeches. A broken heart? Probably leeches too. Physicians call it restoring balance. You call it barely not fainting. Historians still argue whether leech therapy actually helped, or if it was just a socially acceptable way to bleed people in a time when most treatments involved chanting, poultices made of lard and pigeon droppings, or praying very hard. You feel the pull as the first leech latches on. It doesn't hurt at first. Then the next one joins, then the next. Their saliva numbs the area, they're considerate that way, but eventually the blood loss adds up. You glance down. A dozen little black worms, squirming against your pale skin. Each growing fatter, each siphoning a bit of your life. You've got a basket hanging off your belt, filled with small clay jars. One by one, you pry the leeches off gently, carefully, because if you squeeze too hard, they regurgitate blood back into the wound. You learned that the hard way, the first time you fainted on the job and woke up to find your supervisor more annoyed than concerned. A fringe fact for your trouble. Some leech collectors used old animals to do the work for them. Cows or horses were led into the water and left to stand until the leeches clung to their legs. Then the creatures were scraped clean and the leeches gathered. Of course, if you can't afford livestock, and let's be honest, you use your own legs. The real danger isn't even the leeches. It's the water itself. Swamps are teeming with more than just bloodsuckers. There are sharp reeds that slice your calves, hidden holes you can sink into, and occasional sightings of angry frogs the size of small cats. You once saw a snake coil around someone's boot and decide to stay there until the sun went down. After about an hour, you're dizzy. Not dramatically, just that kind of light-headed buzz that makes you hum a little too loudly as you gather the last few squirmers. You wince as you peel one off your thigh. It doesn't want to let go. There's blood, more than you expect. You slap on a handful of moss and hope it clots before you get home. People think you're weird, not because of what you do, but because of how you look. Pale, thin, often covered in little dots of dried blood. You shuffle when you walk, partly from exhaustion, and partly because your shoes are constantly damp. No one wants to sit next to you at church. One time, a baker gave you a roll just to go stand somewhere else. But here's the irony. Your work saves lives. Or at least, that's what they say. Every highborn noble who needs their blood balanced depends on you. Even the monks at the abbey whisper your name when Sister Agnes gets a nosebleed and refuses to stop. And yet, you're not invited inside. You hand off your jars at the back gate, coins exchanged in silence, and then you're on your way. Sometimes, you wonder if the leeches have it better. At least they get a warm meal. By mid-morning, you're back at your hut. It's barely a structure, just woven branches, a sod roof, and the constant buzzing of flies who consider you part of their extended family. You sort the leeches by size and store them in cool jars of rainwater. Then you sit down, rub your legs, and wonder how many years your body can keep doing this. Historians still argue whether leech collectors were treated as medical professionals or just seen as disposable workers. Some records suggest they were even contracted by noble houses for regular deliveries. Others imply they were just one misstep away from being mistaken for vagrants. You know what you are. Essential, unseen, and very, very tired. As you lie back, eyes fluttering shut, You feel the sting of another bite. One leech got away. It's still attached to your ankle, enjoying a private encore performance. You sigh. Let it finish. That's just part of the job. You open the wooden door to a wave of stench so strong it makes your eyes water. Not that you haven't smelled it before, it's your workplace after all. A low stone room with high windows, thick wooden vats, and steam that clings to your skin like old sweat. You're a fuller, and today, like every day, you're going to spend hours trampling cloth in other people's urine. Yes, that kind of urine. Human. Fresh, if you're unlucky. Stale, if you're really unlucky. You work for a weaver, and your job is to clean and strengthen wool. After a fleece is spun into rough cloth, it needs to be cleaned of oils and impurities. Water alone won't cut it. What does the trick? A chemical compound called ammonia, and conveniently, that happens to exist in high concentrations in good old fermented pea. So you step into the first vat. The liquid sloshes above your ankles, cold, sour, and clinging. Your bare feet sink into soaked cloth, and you begin the ancient rhythm. Step, stomp, press, turn. The fabric resists at first, but you know the routine, the dance of stink and patience. Historians still argue whether fullers were seen as skilled workers or just expendable parts of the textile chain. Some cities had fullers' guilds, respected and regulated. Others treated them as glorified laundromats, paid little, praised less, and always conveniently forgotten when festival invitations went out. The work is tedious and physical. You stomp for hours, not minutes hours, with barely a break, no padding underfoot, and no gloves to protect your skin. Your legs cramp, your back aches. You breathe through your mouth, but after a while the smell just seeps in there too. You are the smell, and it doesn't go away when you leave. People wrinkle their noses when you walk by. Dogs bark at you for reasons you don't understand. Children laugh and then run away. Your clothes are clean, technically, but saturated with the unmistakable scent of ammonia and shame. Still, there's a method to your misery. The wool gets stronger as you work it. The cloth tightens, the fibers mesh, and you can feel it under your soles. A product taking shape. You are part of the great medieval engine of commerce. Without you, tunics would fall apart, capes would sag, cloaks would reek worse than they already do. Here's a quirky little tidbit. The Romans did this job too, and they were so enthusiastic about it that Emperor Vespasian taxed urine collection. That's right, public urinals were taxed because the contents were just that useful. He even had a famous saying when criticized, "Money doesn't stink." You mutter that sometimes under your breath as you trample cloth, your lips curling at the irony. Some towns collect urine in jars placed along the streets. People relieve themselves into them. And at the end of the day, it's your job to pick them up. You carry them back on a cart, careful not to spill. Careful, but not always lucky. One jolt over a cobblestone, and suddenly you're soaked in someone's night out at the alehouse. People don't really make eye contact with you. You're necessary, but unspoken. If you had a choice, you'd do something else, but choices aren't a currency you carry. Your father did this. His father did too. And unless you lose a toe from the chemical burns something that absolutely happens, you'll keep doing it. By mid-afternoon, your legs are numb, but the cloth is ready. You hoist it onto the line to dry, heavy, dripping, steaming in the sun. You watch as the golden light hits the fabric. It's almost beautiful. If you don't think too hard about what's inside. A local merchant arrives, pinching his nose as he inspects your work. He nods, tosses you a coin pouch, and walks away without a word. Payment received, praise withheld. Later, as you sit by the fire, scrubbing your feet with vinegar and herbs, a trick passed down from a long-retired fuller who claimed it almost worked. You wonder how long you'll last. You've heard whispers about other methods, alkaline pastes, boiling cloth, even washing with certain kinds of clay. Maybe one day they'll find a cleaner way. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight, your muscles ache, your skin itches, your eyes sting, but the wool is whiter, thicker, and ready to wear. Just don't tell the buyer what you stepped in to get it there. You step into the wheel, not metaphorically, literally. A giant, groaning wooden wheel, taller than a man, creaks beside the cathedral wall. You're barefoot, because shoes slip. You're hungry, because wages are thin. And you're already sweating because today you are a treadmill cranker, the human engine of medieval ambition. Your job? Walk. Just walk, forever. With each step, the massive wheel turns. A series of ropes and pulleys groan into motion, lifting stones, hoisting bells, or powering cranes high above the construction site. Sometimes it's for building cathedrals. Other times, it's for raising heavy machinery in castles or docks. Doesn't matter. The weight gets heavier, the slope gets steeper, and your knees already feel like wet twigs. It's like a hamster wheel, if the hamster had back problems and zero union rights. You lean forward as you climb, toes curling on the wooden slats. There's a rhythm to it. Clunk, creak, groan, step. The timber shifts under your feet. You can hear the load above a massive beam or a bell, or some cargo crate slowly rising. You feel its weight in the strain of the wheel, the sharp jolt when something snags, the brief relief when the crank smooths again. Historians still argue whether these treadmill workers were trained craftsmen or just bodies grabbed from the street. Some evidence points to regular crews hired long-term, while other sources suggest anyone strong enough and desperate enough could be shoved inside on a moment's notice. You're probably the latter. You got here because you owed someone, or because the fields had no harvest, or because this paid marginally more than starving. Either way, no one asked if your knees could take it. They just handed you a crust of bread and pointed to the wheel. Here's a quirky bit. Medieval illustrations sometimes depict these treadmills looking oddly cheerful men, walking with purpose, smiling even. You wonder if the artist had ever done the job. Probably not, because after an hour in here you're soaked through. After 2 you're shaking. After 3, you start hallucinating that the wheel never existed, and you've just been climbing into the sky forever. It's not just the walking, it's the claustrophobia. The wheel is enclosed. Wood above, behind, below, all around. You hear the creak of ancient joints with every step. One snap, and the whole thing could collapse. People have died in here, legs shattered, necks snapped. You heard about a boy once, 14 years old, who slipped during a downpour and got crushed when the wheel reversed. You try not to think about that as the wind picks up and the structure groans louder. Occasionally someone outside yells, "Faster!" like they think you were holding back. You speed up. The weight above groans in protest. You feel it in your thighs, like dragging a mountain behind your knees. Your palms grip the wooden bars beside you. No gloves, just splinters and sweat. A pigeon lands on the beam outside. It watches you, cocking its head, possibly judging your form. You keep going. And still, this job is better than some. You're not dealing with filth, at least. You don't stink like the gong farmer, or peel your own skin off like the lime burner. You will lose your hearing eventually, too much groaning timber and shouting, but for now, you've got your legs and most of your teeth. That's a win. Sometimes, if you work near a cathedral build, you get to hear the choir sing during services. Their voices drift up like feathers, while you trudge below, the engine beneath the music. You imagine you're part of something bigger, something sacred. Then the supervisor barks for another shift, and the sacred feels a lot like sciatica. You pause only when the load is done, raised, secured, and tied off. A few minutes to sit in the dirt, maybe drink some warm water from a leather flask. If someone's feeling generous, you get a bite of onion or cheese. Then it's back inside. Historians still argue whether these treadmill cranes were inventions of necessity or genius, or both. Some say they were the medieval answer to the steam engine, human-powered precision tools that made towering architecture possible. Others say they were just another way to grind poor bodies down until they couldn't stand anymore. You know how it feels. That first step into the wheel in the morning, the dread, the slow climb. The moment you forget where you are or what hour it is. Just you and the rhythm. Your breath sinking with the creaks. Your hope stored somewhere outside, waiting for the day you can walk away and never look back. But for now, step, step, step. The bell won't lift itself. You crouch in the shadows of a barn, breath shallow, eyes darting between beams and hay bales. You hear its skittering claws, a high-pitched squeak, maybe a gnawing sound on grain sacks. That's your cue. You're a rat catcher, and tonight you're going to war with the medieval world's most feared furry menace. Armed with a burlap sack, a short club, and nerves that left the building 3 hours ago, you crawl toward the noise. A tail flashes across the floorboards. You lunge. Miss. Swear under your breath. Something tame PG-13, of course. Then reset and wait. Rat catching isn't brute force. It's patience, instinct, and a stomach strong enough to handle the smell of warm rot mixed with fur. The villagers love you, in theory. They don't invite you in or offer stew, but they do scream your name when their cellars start twitching. You are the thin, twitchy line between them and plague, or at least the loss of next winter's grain. Historians still argue whether rats actually caused the Black Death or were just the scapegoats, alongside their poor fleas. Some studies now suggest human lice may have played a bigger role than anyone guessed. But rats got the press. And they still do, which is why you make your coin stalking them through haylofts, under floorboards, behind church pews. You know their habits when they sleep, where they nest, how they chew through leather and wood like it's bread crust. You know the mothers are the most dangerous. Corner one with pups, and you will bleed. Here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Some rat catchers in medieval Europe actually trained small dogs, or even ferrets, to help flush out their prey. You don't have a ferret. You had one once, great little guy, name was Pip, but he disappeared into a bakery and never came back. Either he retired or became someone's midnight stew. Tonight, you're working solo. You creep along the rafters, club raised. 1, 2, whack. The rat goes limp. You drop it in the sack and keep moving. Some towns pay by the tail, others pay by the head. In one particularly grim contract, you got paid double if you brought in a pregnant female. You didn't ask why, you just cashed the extra coin. Your fingers are covered in bites, old and new. Some are scars, others still ooze if you press too hard. You wrap them in cloth and hope no one notices the swelling. You saw what happened to the guy who ignored an infected bite last spring. Let's just say the fever took his sense of humor, then his left foot. But still, this job matters. When the baker sees you hauling off a sack full of rats, he nods with genuine respect. When the innkeeper pays you to sweep his cellar before the wine barrels get chewed, he adds a few coppers more than promised. And when the abbess at the convent gives you a hunk of cheese after you found a nest under the chapel floor, you almost cried. Of course, most of the time, people avoid you. You smell like a mix of mildew, rat musk, and whatever died in your pockets last week. Your clothes are torn from crawling through thatch and wood piles. Your hair? Let's just say it's not winning any courtly awards. But you don't mind. You're too busy listening for that next scratch, that next squeak. You once found a rat nest the size of a washtub behind a church organ. 17 rats. One of them had a gold ring in its mouth, no one could explain that. Another time, you opened a grain bin, and the entire thing moved. Like a breathing, hissing carpet. You shut it again, and walked away. Not all coin is worth your sanity. Historians still argue whether medieval rat catchers were official employees of the town like the gong farmers, or just freelancers trying to scrape by. Some cities did issue licenses, others treated you like a useful freak. Always needed, rarely thanked. You make your way to the final spot for the night, the granary behind the inn. You slip in through a loose board and hold still. The air is thick. You smell barley, sweat, and something sour. Then you hear it. Movement in the corner. You crouch, tighten your grip. Then pounce, you swing. Miss, swing again. Got it. The innkeeper will be happy tomorrow. Maybe he'll throw in a warm ale. Maybe not. Either way, you'll sleep tonight with a little extra coin and a little less blood in your hands. As you walk home, sack slung over your shoulder, the moonlight catches your shadow. It looks like some kind of goblin, hunched and silent. You smile. Maybe that's what you've become. But at least you're their goblin. The bell tolls once low, slow, and heavy. Then again, you know that sound. Everyone does. It doesn't mean mass. It doesn't mean market. It means someone has died. Again. And you? You're the one who has to carry them away. You're a plague barrier. And today, you'll haul a cart filled with the unluckiest souls in town. Your neighbors, your cousins, the blacksmith's wife, maybe even the boy who once gave you his last apple. The cart is old. The wheels squeak. The wood is cracked and dark, with old stains you try not to look at too closely. Your shovel leans awkwardly against the side, clinking with every jolt. A single handbell dangles from your wrist, a rule passed down by terrified town leaders. You must ring it with every step, so the living know to stay far, far away. Bring out your dead, you whisper, voice hoarse from hours of calling. Bring out your dead. Sometimes, someone opens a window just wide enough to shove out a body wrapped in linens. Other times, you find the dead lying alone in doorways or gutters, already stiff, their eyes wide and confused. Historians still argue whether plague buriers were forced into the role or volunteered for coin and food. Some records show city officials paying decent wages and even offering housing. Others imply desperate peasants took the job when there was nothing else left. You're not sure which camp you fall into. You remember once digging ditches. Then, the plague came. Now, you move bodies. Today's first stop is the baker's alley. The door is ajar, a hand reaching out from the frame. You pause, lift the body gently, try not to look too long at the face. You recognize her. Kind eyes. Used to give you the heels of her loaves. You whisper a thank you and lay her carefully in the cart. Next stop, the shoemaker's. A bundle lies by the steps. Too small. A child. You swallow hard and lift. No words. Just the creak of the cart, the clang of the bell, and the hollow thud of grief rolling behind you. Here's a quirky, morbid tidbit. During the height of the Black Death, some plague carts were decorated with ribbons or symbols not to honor the dead, but to help track which bodies came from which wards. The living needed records. The dead didn't care. You push the cart to the edge of town. The trench is already half full. You grab the shovel, bite your lip, and start transferring one body at a time. No rituals, no prayers, just earth, linen, and silence. When the cart is empty, you sprinkle lime over the pit to mask the smell. It doesn't work. You used to wear a scarf soaked in vinegar. Some said it would protect you. Now you just go without. Whatever's coming for you has already sniffed you out. And still, you're alive. For now, people cross the street when they see you. Friends avert their eyes. One man spat in your direction last week and hissed, "Bringer of death." You wanted to shout back, "No, I just carry it." But instead, you rang your bell and walked on. The irony is cruel. You risk your life daily, and yet you're treated like a curse. But someone has to do it. If the bodies stay, the sickness spreads. You've seen it happen. Once, a family tried to hide their dead child in the cellar, afraid of losing their home. A week later, the entire household was gone. Historians still argue whether plague buriers were considered heroes or pariahs. Some were buried with honors, others were buried early, suspected of being infected, even if they weren't. No trial. No questions, just a quicker end. You finish the burial just as dusk settles in. Your arms ache, your legs shake. You haven't eaten since yesterday, but the pit is full, the body's covered, the worst of today's work done. For now, as you walk back into town, the sky bruising purple above, you pass a woman lighting candles in her window. She doesn't look at you, but she doesn't close the shutters either. Maybe that's something. You head to your hut, wash your hands in a barrel of grey water, scrub until your skin feels raw. It doesn't help. You still feel the touch of the dead, still smell the scent of decay that clings no matter how hard you scrub. You lie down, staring at the beams above. The bell, now silent, rests beside your cot. You whisper into the dark, "Let me wake up tomorrow." Then you sleep. Just one more night. Just one more. The bread is cold, the ale is stale, and the man beneath the shroud is very much dead. You sit beside him on a wooden stool, hands folded, face still. No one else is here. The family has gone. The priest mumbled his last words and left in a hurry. It's just you now, and the dead man. And dinner. You are a sign eater. It's not glamorous, it's not holy, and it's definitely not well paid. But for a few copper coins, a crust of bread, and a cup of ale, you've agreed to do something that most people wouldn't dare. Eat this man's sins. All of them. You take the bread and place it on his chest. Gently, respectfully. Then you wait just a moment for whatever part of the ritual makes you shiver. Then you eat it, slowly. deliberately, because tradition says that in doing so, you are absorbing the wrongs of the deceased. Theft, jealousy, lies, betrayal, all of it passes from his soul to your mouth, then into your belly. And now, they're yours. Historians still argue whether sign-eating was ever officially recognized by the church, or merely a folk tradition whispered through poor villages. Some documents call it pagan, others mention priests who looked the other way. Either way, it was common in parts of Britain and beyond, especially in communities too small, too isolated, or too poor to afford a proper absolution. You're not ordained, you're not holy, but you're available. It's always the same. You sit, you eat, you leave. No one thanks you. Some won't even make eye contact. They treat you like a spiritual sponge, soak up the guilt, then disappear. And whatever you do, don't touch the widow. Don't look at the children, don't say too much. They're already afraid of what you might carry home. They think you're cursed. You finish the bread. It's dry and dusty, the crust burned. You sip the ale, it's warm, with a sour tang that makes your lips twitch. Still, you don't complain. The living may not respect you, but the dead? They never argue. Here's a quirky bit for your sleepless brain. Some sign-eaters developed a reputation not just for absorbing sin, but for knowing secrets. After all, you sat beside the corpse. You heard the whispers. Sometimes the dying confessed to you when the priest wasn't around. You became a vessel, a vault. You knew who loved whom, who stole what, who cursed a neighbor and regretted it. You swallow, hard. Maybe you carry too much. The room creaks as you rise. The candlelight flickers against the wall, throwing tall, hunched shadows that don't look quite like you. You place a copper on the table, symbolic, part of the rite, and step outside into the cold night. The stars are bright tonight. The village is quiet. But as you walk down the road, you sense doors closing behind you, curtains shifting, people watching, not in gratitude, not in fear, something stranger. Like they need you, but don't want to admit it. You once tried to stop. You once said, "No more." But hunger is persuasive. Loneliness even more so. And so you returned, mouth full of ritual, eyes dry, soul heavy. Sometimes you wonder, where do the sins go? Into your bones? Your dreams? That cough you can't shake? That darkness you feel some mornings before the sun rises? Historians still debate whether sign-eaters believed in their own power, or if they were just performing a service, doing a job no one else wanted, much like the gong farmer or the plague barrier. You think the truth lies somewhere in between. Because tonight, when you look back at the house, the one with the dead man, you feel lighter. Not cleaner, just released. Like you were holding your breath for someone else, and finally exhaled. You reach your door. Small, crooked, always cold, but safe. Inside, you place the last coin you earned into a wooden bowl. Tomorrow, you'll buy onions. Or maybe a bit of salt pork, if you can haggle. You lie down on the straw mat, hands over your chest, mirroring the man you left behind. And somewhere in the silence, you whisper, "I forgive you," even if no one ever says it back. The dye seeps into your skin again, deep blue, almost black now, staining your palms and creeping beneath your fingernails like ink from a cursed book. You stir the vat slowly, the wooden paddle heavy in your hands, each motion releasing more of that bitter, sour stench that clings to your nose and refuses to leave. You're a woad dyer, and your entire world is soaked in blue. The plant you use, Isatis tinctoria, grows wild in fields, looking harmless enough, but the magic doesn't happen until it ferments. And to ferment it properly, you need a few things: time, warmth, and urine. Human urine. Fresh, stale, doesn't matter. You've got barrels of it, stewing, bubbling, waiting. You're not just dyeing fabric, you're living in it, breathing it, smelling it from under your bedroll and in the threads of your hair. Every inch of your skin is either cracked or stained, and when people see your hands, they cross the road. You walk into a market, and the butcher sniffs the air suspiciously. The baker offers bread, but at twice the price. You're the walking embodiment of unpleasant but necessary. Historians still argue whether woad dyers were considered craftsmen or bottom-tier labourers. In some guilds, dyeing was a respected skill after all, Colour was status. Blue was in fashion, especially for peasants who couldn't afford scarlet. But in smaller towns, woadworkers were shoved to the outskirts, literally zoned out of cities for the smell alone. And the smell, it's something else. Here's a fringe tidbit. In parts of Europe, dye workers were banned from washing in public rivers because the runoff from their vats was turning the water into a chemical soup. Not great for fish. Worse for the people downstream who drank it. You once saw a goose wander into your runoff and come out slightly green. But the colour? Beautiful. Once the cloth dries in the sun and oxidizes, that dull greenish grey transforms into rich, vivid indigo. You hold it up to the light and admire it, even if you know you'll never wear it. That's not your role. Your hands make the beauty. Someone else gets to enjoy it. The process is brutal. You crush woad leaves into a paste, mix it into the urine-rich water, and let it sit for days. The smell grows as the mixture ferments sharp, almost metallic. You've learned to breathe shallowly. Sometimes, you dab mint under your nose like the plague barriers do. Doesn't help much. You stir for hours, back and forth. The dye must be kept moving to release its full colour. The fumes sting your eyes. You blink through tears and keep going. The paddle slips once, and your sleeve dips into the vat. You sigh. Another tunic ruined. Still, there's a rhythm to it. You stir, you breathe, you step back. Then the dipping begins. Cloth is lowered into the vat and held just long enough to soak. Not too long it'll rot, not too short it'll fade. You watch it drip, dripping like something alive, shifting colour as it reacts to the air. You think of it as alchemy sometimes. Dirty, smelly, glorious alchemy. You remember the first time you saw your father do this. How his hands were already blue, his hair stiff with fumes, his face half hidden behind a scarf. You were 6. You asked if it hurt. He didn't answer. He just handed you a scrap of dyed wool and said, "People will wear this and never know where it came from." They still don't. Sometimes children peek through the fence around your workshop. They point and giggle, daring each other to smell the vats. You don't mind. You were one of them once. Until life, coin, and the lack of other options dipped you into this profession and never let you climb back out. The day ends with cloth lines full of drying fabrics, snapping gently in the breeze. From afar, it looks beautiful. Blue banners fluttering like some forgotten festival. Up close, still smells like pee. You wash your hands in a barrel of vinegar, hoping to lighten the stains. It never really works. You rub the cracked skin with lard, then wrap it in cloth. Your hands look 20 years older than your face, but they're strong. They've made hundreds of tunics, cloaks, ribbons, all worn by people who wouldn't let you sit beside them at supper. Historians still debate how far back the woad trade reached. Some say the Celts dyed themselves blue with it before battle. Others claim that's mostly legend, an exaggerated tale to scare Roman enemies. Either way, the myth stuck. Blue skin, blue war cries, blue rage. You don't feel like a warrior. Just a tired craftsman with aching joints and no clean clothes. As the moon rises, you sit by the fire, watching the last of the steam curl from your vats. Tomorrow you'll start again. The blade is sharp, the crowd is loud, and your heart, it's complicated. You stand behind the scaffold, oiling the axe. The sun is rising, casting long shadows across the square. Soon, the condemned will arrive, chained and pale. You don't know their name. You rarely do. You only know your job. You're the executioner, and you're the most feared and loneliest man in town. It's strange. People don't speak to you unless they have to. They don't look at you unless they're forced. A woman with bruises, wanting to know how long it takes, really, for someone to vanish. You don't answer. But you listen. Because you are many things, executioner, yes, but also listener, confessor, silent judge. You carry the weight others pretend not to notice. Historians still debate whether executioners passed their trade down through family lines, or were simply condemned men given a new role. Some families in France and Germany kept the job for generations. You don't wear it to hide, though, that's what people assume. You wear it because it's easier to become someone else behind the hood. Someone who doesn't flinch when heads roll. Someone who doesn't dream about eyes staring up from baskets. The prisoner is led out. He stumbles. The crowd roars like a beast. They're not here for justice. They're here for blood. You can feel it in the way they lean forward, eyes bright. You wonder how many of them have begged for mercy behind closed doors, only to cheer for death in public. You guide the man to the block. Speak low. Tell him it will be fast if he stays still. Your voice is kind, almost apologetic. You've said this before, too many times. He nods. You see the fear in his knuckles, white against the restraints. You raise the axe. Hold your breath. Then, thunk. Silence. Then a cheer. Then coins tossed into the dirt. Some hit your boots. You clean the blade, wipe your brow, and walk away. You don't stay for the aftermath. That's not your job. You don't watch the body cart roll away or hear the whispers about how clean the cut was. You go to the butcher instead. He sells you meat that no one else wants. Liver, kidney, sometimes tongue. He never looks at your face. Here's a curious little fact. Executioners were sometimes paid not just in coin, but in body parts. A severed hand here, a head there, for science. Or less noble purposes. One man in Nuremberg was known to sell skulls to apothecaries, who ground them into powder to treat headaches. Irony, anyone? You eat alone. No one joins your table at the tavern. Even the tavern keeper avoids eye contact. Your beer is brought to the far corner, placed silently before you, as if you might curse it by speaking. And yet, some seek you out in secret. A merchant whose rival might deserve punishment. A nobleman asking about poisons. It was both a burden and a living. You remember your father, how he taught you to sharpen the axe with care, how to swing from the shoulder, not the elbow, how to speak gently to the condemned. They deserve a voice, even now, he said, especially now. You never asked why he took the job. You never will. Tonight, you sharpen the blade again. Slowly, deliberately. The steel gleams in the firelight. The townspeople sleep easy, convinced justice has been served. You lie awake, wondering if mercy ever has a name. The door creaks open, and you follow the king inside, not into battle, not into council, not even into his wardrobe. No, this room is more personal. It's tiled in stone, warm from the fire, and the air smells faintly of herbs and whatever the royal chef sent up last night. At the centre sits a carved wooden seat, a stool, but not just any stool. This one has a hole. You're the groom of the stool, and yes, it means exactly what it sounds like. You close the door behind you. No guards, no servants, just you, the monarch, and the delicate matter of royal digestion. Now before you gag, know this. This isn't the bottom rung of the palace ladder. Far from it. You're one of the most trusted men in the realm. You are, quite literally, the king's closest confidant. And when a man lets you see him at his most vulnerable, he tends to tell you things he tells no one else. Historians still argue whether the groom of the stool's real power came from his duties or from what he overheard. Because while you handed the towel and the basin, you also listened. You knew who had favour, who didn't, who was sick, who was scheming. You were the whisper behind the throne, the man whose hands were busy but whose ears were always open. Still, let's not pretend your job wasn't weird. Each morning, you checked the linen cloths, the water temperature, the soap, and the herbal rinses. You monitored the king's meals so you could anticipate movement. You kept a log, yes, that kind, of his health, colour, consistency. Physicians might pretend to know his body. You actually did. Here's a fringe tidbit. One Tudor groom of the stool, Hugh Denny's, had so much influence that he handled the king's private finances, controlled court access, and even advised on matters of state, all while managing royal evacuations. You kneel beside the stool as His Majesty settles in. He sighs. You avert your eyes. You hand him the cloth when he gestures. You exchange quiet words about the weather, or maybe what the Archbishop said at breakfast. You keep it light, always light. And when it's done, you help him rise, tidy what must be tidied, and assist him into his embroidered hose. You do all of this with dignity, discretion, and absolutely no eye rolls. Because make no mistake, this is about trust. The king may be surrounded by nobles and generals, but you see what they don't. His weakness, his aging body, his human need. And in that, You become something sacred, something untouchable. Except, everyone does touch you, in the political sense. Courtiers beg for your favor. Ambassadors slip you letters. Duchesses flatter you with wine and pastries. They all know. If you whisper in the king's ear at the right moment, anything could happen. It's a strange balance. In public, you're barely acknowledged. In private, you're indispensable. Sometimes, when you walk the palace gardens alone, servants give you a wide berth. Not out of disrespect, more like superstition, as if your job somehow cursed you with too much knowledge, or maybe just too much proximity. And you get lonely. You can't talk about your day over supper, can't laugh about the awkward silences, or the time the king passed gas during a French envoy's visit and you both had to pretend it was the chair creaking. You carry your discretion like a cloak. Heavy, unseen, necessary. Historians still debate how the role evolved. Early grooms were seen as glorified attendants. Later ones, particularly under Henry VIII, became some of the most powerful men in court. Some even rose to the rank of baron. Not bad for someone who started with a washcloth and a polite smile. You polish the stool before leaving the chamber. Everything must be spotless. Always. The king may never say thank you, but if you ever miss a step, he will absolutely say something else. Back in your quarters, you soak your hands in rose water. You eat a quiet supper. You review tomorrow's schedule. Then you sit at your desk and, by candlelight, record today's event in the ledger. No names, just initials, and an asterisk next to the note. Unusual texture. Increase fennel. You close the book. Tomorrow the king will rise, and so will you. One step behind, one breath away, quiet, trusted, necessary. Because while others hold his sword, his seal, his crown, you hold the truth. The heat hits you like a slap dry, choking, immediate. You haven't even stepped fully inside the kiln shed, and your skin's already sweating. Your eyes sting. Your throat rasps. And the worst part? You haven't even started work yet. You're a lime burner. And if fire has a cousin, it's this job. You shovel another load of limestone into the kiln's roaring belly. It's not the kind of fire you warm your hands by. This is a chemical fire. The kind that transforms rock into a substance so caustic it can eat through skin, lungs, and hope. Quicklime. One of the medieval world's most useful and dangerous materials. Used in mortar, plaster, whitewash, and even military defense. Yes, more on that in a second. Quicklime is essential. And someone has to make it. That someone is you. Historians still argue whether lime burners were respected tradesmen, or just the expendable lower rung in a builder's food chain. Some towns treated them like skilled artisans. Others buried them early and quickly when the fumes got the better of them. You drag the bellows stick. The flame surges inside the dome, casting flickering shadows on the blackened walls. Your eyebrows have long since singed off. The hair on your arms is crisped into wiry patches. And your skin? Permanently dusted in white, like a ghost who's been doing push-ups in a powder pit. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Quicklime reacts violently with water. Toss it into a puddle, and it hisses then boils. Soldiers once used it as a weapon, dropping it from castle walls to blind attackers. Imagine that. You're cooking up medieval eye grenades by the wheelbarrow. The process is simple in theory. Stack limestone and wood in a layered kiln. Light the fire. Keep it burning for days. Then, once the stone crumbles to powdery white lime, remove it carefully without breathing too deeply or getting it on your skin. Both are easier said than done. You wipe your brow. Your hand comes back gritty. You grab your scarf and tie it around your mouth. It barely helps. The dust hangs in the air like flour, but more sinister. Each breath rasps in your lungs. You've developed a cough lately, dry, persistent, and sharp. You ignore it. There's no one to tell anyway. You work alone. No one wants to be near the kiln, unless they have to be. You've heard people say the job shortens your life. You believe it. When you do go into town for food or tools, shopkeepers rush the sale. You look like death with a shovel. Children dare each other to touch your cloak. Women cross themselves when you pass. Once, someone called you fire's husband. You're still not sure if it was an insult or poetry. You used to think the job was temporary, just until you saved enough coin. But the longer you stay, the more the white dust settles into your life, into your joints, your sleep, your dreams. Even your dog won't come near you anymore. You rake the embers, watching sparks rise into the night. The glow is strangely beautiful, hypnotic almost. You think about the cathedrals built from your lime, the plastered walls where bishops preach, the frescoes that need your powder to hold their paint. Art, beauty, elegance, all built on the ashes of your lungs. Historians still debate how widespread the health risks were known. Some argue that lime burners were well aware and just desperate. Others suggest they thought the coughing was from the smoke, not the dust. But you've watched 3 older burners collapse mid-shift. You've seen what it does. And yet, here you are. You pull out a tin flask, warm water, flat beer, hard to tell. You drink, you choke, you cough again. Then you shovel more stone into the kiln. It never stops. Once a batch finishes, another begins. There's always more to burn, more stone to crush, more fire to feed. Sometimes, late at night, you wonder if you're turning to lime yourself. If one day, someone will find your bones, bleached and brittle, scattered in the kiln's shadow. They'll say, "He must have worked here," and move on. But for now, you work. You breathe what you must. You endure what you have to. And you remind yourself, cathedrals need mortar, mortar needs lime, lime needs fire, and fire needs you. You move like a shadow, quiet, careful, and always watching your back. The graveyard is empty now, except for the rising mist and the soft rustle of leaves. You wait until the last lantern has faded behind the chapel window. Then you sling your spade over your shoulder and hop the low stone wall. You're a resurrectionist, a body snatcher, a supplier of corpses, a midnight professional, but not for some dark cult or ghastly ritual. No, you steal the dead for science. Behind you, a wooden cart waits under a tarp, lined with straw. Just enough room for 2 or 3 unfortunate passengers. You told yourself you'd only do this once. Just one night, one body, one payout. That was 5 bodies ago. Historians still argue whether resurrectionists were truly criminals or just necessary evils. After all, medical schools needed cadavers, and no one was donating their bodies to science in the 1302nd, or the 1602nd, or even the 1802nd for that matter. Someone had to bridge the gap between death and discovery. That someone? You. You kneel beside the freshest mound. Still soft, easier to dig. You pause, listening. An owl hoots nearby. A dog barks, then silence. Good. You begin. It's not like digging a garden. Graves are deep, soil is heavy. The first layer comes off in thick clumps, but once you get down to the burial shroud, the work gets delicate. You don't want to damage the goods. Tonight, it's an elderly man, slim build, cloth wrappings, not too decayed. The doctor will be pleased. You ease him out of the earth like a sleeping child. Head first gently. You never look them in the eyes if they're open. That's one of your rules. Along with, don't dig alone and never go back to the same graveyard twice in 1 week. You're breaking both tonight. You wrap the body in canvas and load it into the cart. A coin purse jingles in your coat. The teaching hospital 2 towns over pays well. They don't ask questions. They never do. Here's your fringe fact for the night. In some places, families went to absurd lengths to protect the dead. Iron cages called mort safes were placed over graves. Stones too heavy to lift. And even gunpowder traps. One unfortunate resurrectionist lost a hand. You? You lost a boot once, trying to outrun a very fast, very awake gravedigger. You wheel the cart down the back road. The fog thickens. The body shifts with each bump, but you've padded the corners. You're a professional, after all. The hardest part? Not the digging, not the guilt. It's the waiting. The long hours of dusk, the ache in your joints, the silence that feels like it's judging you. People in town think you're just a night watchman or maybe a travelling tinker. You keep your story vague. No one looks too hard. You smell like earth, sweat, and something faintly sour, like old coins. You used to justify it by telling yourself, They're already gone. What harm can it do? But then there was the girl. Barely 16. You remember her name. That's why you don't ask anymore. If the doctor says fresh, you just nod. Historians still debate whether body snatching was common across all of medieval Europe, or mostly limited to major cities and early modern periods. The truth is, it happened wherever medicine advanced faster than morality. If the healers couldn't cut, they couldn't cure. You arrive at the rendezvous point, a barn behind a shuttered mill. A lantern flickers inside. You knock once, then twice. The door opens. The doctor doesn't speak. He nods, lifts the canvas flap, and inspects the goods. He hands you the pouch heavier than expected. Maybe he's grateful. Maybe he's nervous. You don't count it until you're back on the road. Sometimes they ask for specifics. Elderly, male, signs of trauma. You get what you can. You don't dig heroes. You dig the forgotten. And in return, you eat. You sleep in a bed. You own boots without holes. It's not a good life, but it's yours. Later, you clean your shovel with vinegar and lye. You sit by a low fire, sipping cold ale, staring into the flame. You wonder what the doctors learn from these corpses, where their hands go, whether they whisper apologies before the first cut. You never ask. They never tell. You sleep with one eye open. The church guard has started making extra rounds. A new priest, young and idealistic, thinks someone should protect the dead. You suppose that's noble. But to you, it's just inconvenient. Tomorrow, another grave. Another night. Another silent passenger. Because science demands the body, and you're the one who delivers. The prince throws the ink pot. It crashes against the stone wall, splattering black across the tapestries. You flinch slightly but don't move from your spot. You're used to this by now. The tantrums, the thrown objects, the insults. You are a whipping boy, a living, breathing lightning rod for royal frustration. And your bruises? They're not for your sins. They're for his. The idea is simple. The prince cannot be struck. He is of noble blood, appointed by God, and therefore untouchable. But he can't go without punishment, not entirely so you've been appointed to take it for him. If he lies, you're whipped. If he disobeys his tutor, you bleed. If he forgets his Latin again, well, you'd best hope the switch is still green and soft. Historians still argue whether whipping boys were a widespread practice or more of a romanticized legend. Some sources insist they were common in the courts of early modern Europe. Others suggest it was rare, perhaps symbolic, a cautionary tale about royalty and consequence. But you live it. You were chosen not because you were bad, but because you were close, the same age. From a respectable enough family to be allowed near the prince, but not so noble that your blood mattered. You eat what he eats. You study what he studies. You live in the same quarters. You're even encouraged to be friends. And some days, you are. He gives you half his fig pie after dinner, shows you secret passages behind the chapel. Once, he even covered for you when you snuck a look at the court magician's spellbook. You laughed until your stomach hurt, but then he sasses his tutor, or breaks his lute, or sets fire to the lesson scrolls by accident. And suddenly, you're on your knees, back bared, while the lash finds you instead. The prince watches. Sometimes he winces, sometimes he doesn't. One time, you saw him cry. Not for you, exactly just at the idea that someone else hurt because of his mistake. It was the first time he understood power. Here's a strange little tidbit. One famous English whipping boy, William Murray, grew up to become the first Earl of Dysart. Turns out, if you survive long enough, royalty sometimes remembers your face, especially if it was bruised for them over and over again. But you're not thinking about nobility tonight. You're thinking about how to lie on your side without aggravating the welts along your spine. You're 13, maybe 14. You've lost count. Time bends around bruises. You still go to lessons. You still answer the tutor's questions. And you always get them right. The prince doesn't. But he gets the applause. You get the backhanded, clever for your station remark, and another ink-stained scroll. When guests visit, they call you the boy who follows. You are never introduced by name. You sit at the second table, You wear the plainer cloak, but you are always present, because punishment must be visible. You once asked, "Why not just punish him in private?" The steward gave you a look as if you'd farted in the chapel. "That is not how it works," he said. "Shame is public. Privilege is inherited. You've never forgotten that. The odd thing is, the prince does rely on you. He trusts you, tells you things he can't tell anyone else. He confesses fears about his father, about becoming king, about whether God can see into dreams. And you listen. Because what else are you going to do? You've learned that pain creates silence, and silence creates secrets. And in a castle built on appearances, you are the only mirror he's allowed to crack. Sometimes, you dream of running away. You imagine joining a troupe of actors, or signing onto a ship. But those dreams fade fast. The court owns your breath, and until they say otherwise, you belong to the boy whose mistakes write themselves into your skin. Historians still debate whether whipping boys eventually grew to resent the princes they served or loved them. Maybe both. You understand that better than anyone. Because love, when tied to suffering, gets twisted. And some days you hate him. Other days, you die for him. Tonight, you lie in bed, watching torchlight flicker on the ceiling. You hear him snoring in the next room. The door between you left open, always open. You wonder if he'll remember you when he wears the crown. Or if he'll just remember the sound the whip made. The bucket is warm. That's your first thought this morning as the handle bites into your palm and a familiar sloshing sound reminds you that life, once again, has placed you at the absolute bottom of someone else's problem. You're a gong farmer's apprentice? And you thought being a gong farmer was the worst job in medieval history? Oh no. You carry the buckets. You're not even trusted with a shovel yet. You stumble down the narrow alley behind the tannery, both arms stretched wide, trying to keep the twin wooden pails from knocking against your legs. One is already leaking. Great. You pray the liquid is just rainwater, but deep down, you know better. Last night's collections from 3 tenement houses, human waste, kitchen scraps, sickness, and possibly something worse. And now it's your job to haul it to the dumping pit outside the city walls, where it will be, well, let's say repurposed, would be too generous. You're 14, maybe 15. No one asked. No one cares. You didn't dream of this life. You got here because your uncle is a full-time gong farmer, and you needed a trade. Now your mornings begin with the smell of every bad decision the town made after too much ale. Historians still argue whether apprentices in waste work were usually related by blood, coerced through debt, or just desperate kids looking for anything that paid. Records show all 3 routes were common. You didn't ask enough questions before moving in with your uncle. And now you're here hip-deep in it. Literally, last week, you slipped in the mud beside the collection trench and didn't walk straight for 2 days. Today's route includes the alehouse, the baker's quarters, and a suspiciously quiet brothel. You try not to think too hard about what's in those buckets. You focus instead on not spilling, because if you do, the splash zone becomes your new scent for the rest of the day. Your shoulders burn by midday. The leather strap digs into your neck. Every step jiggles the contents, threatening rebellion. People part around you like you're made of fire or worse. No one wants to be near the boy who smells like the city's sins. Here's a fringe little nugget for your growing mental museum of awfulness. Some apprentices were tasked not just with hauling the waste, but with tasting small amounts of it to determine if plague had reached a new ward. Yes, tasting. They called it testing the rot. You pray your uncle never asks. Back at the cesspit, you dump the contents with a grunt. The splash echoes in the chamber below like a wet slap. The fumes hit your nose like a fist. You stagger back, coughing. The older gong farmers chuckle behind their scarves. One offers you a rag soaked in rosemary. It barely masks anything. You ask when you'll get to handle a shovel. They laugh harder. When you stop dropping buckets, one says, elbowing you in the ribs, you don't respond. You just grab the next pair and keep moving. Because someone has to. People say they admire hard workers. But not you. They don't see you just what follows you. You've been shooed away from bread stalls, refused water from wells, and asked to wait outside at your own cousin's wedding feast. But the irony? The city would collapse without you. If you stop, the waste backs up. The rats come back. The diseases crawl out of basements and into baby cribs. You are the thin, smelly line between order and chaos. And yet, you're invisible. Historians still debate whether medieval cities truly appreciated sanitation workers or just tolerated them. Some towns paid decent wages, others dumped their corpses in the same pits they once shoveled into. It all depended on whether the mayor had a nose for hygiene. You return home after dusk. Your clothes hang heavy with moisture. Your feet are blistered. You wash your hands with lye and lemon peel. The sting in your cuts sharp but oddly satisfying. You scrape your nails with a twig, then sit. Dinner is lentils and stale bread. Your uncle says nothing, just nods toward the hearth. You lie down, eyes heavy, dreams already waiting. But before you drift off, you wonder something absurd. What if someone wrote your name down someday? Not the prince, not the priest. You. The boy who carried buckets through the filth and never dropped a single drop inside the chapel. You smile briefly, then roll over, because tomorrow starts early, and the buckets are already full. The patient's breath smells like rot. You hold the man's chin with one hand, firm but gentle, and squint into the cavern of his mouth. What you see confirms what you already guessed. Blackened gums, a molar hanging by a thread, and a cluster of sores that seem to pulse on their own. You take a breath shallow, always shallow, and reach for your tools. You're a medieval dentist, which is to say, you're about to make someone scream. The tools aren't glamorous. No tiny mirrors or gentle suction hoses here. You've got iron pliers that look more suited for shoeing horses than tending mouths, a mallet for the tough cases, and a rag soaked in vinegar ostensibly to clean, but mostly to seem like you're trying. Your patient is sweating already. He clutches the chair, which is really just a barrel with a blanket over it. Around you, a small crowd gathers, because you're doing this in the market square. Yes, outside, in front of everyone. You nod at the assistant, your cousin, barely 12, who places a wooden bit between the man's teeth. Bite down, you say. This won't take long. A lie. It always takes long. Historians still argue whether medieval dentists had any formal training or were simply blacksmiths who took an interest in mouths. Some operated under barbers, others under sheer, terrifying confidence. You? You inherited the role from your uncle, who once pulled a tooth so hard the patient fainted and woke up a local legend. You grip the pliers, wiggle, test the root. The man groans. Then you pull. He howls like a wounded wolf. Blood splashes your apron. The tooth gives eventually with a wet pop that's always more satisfying than it should be. You hold it up. One less problem, you say cheerfully. The crowd claps, half in relief, half in schadenfreude. Someone tosses a coin. Someone else retches. The patient stumbles off, woozy but lighter. Next, you once tried using herbs, clove oil, crushed mint, even some imported spice from a travelling merchant. They dulled the pain slightly. But nothing works like distraction. You talk the patient through it. Ask about their goats, their brother's wedding, anything to keep them from focusing on the cold metal in their mouth. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval dentists swore by using mouse skulls tied around the neck to draw out tooth demons. Others painted crushed emeralds onto the gums. Spoiler, neither worked. You've learned that speed is the only real kindness you can offer. You work all day, pulling, tapping, sometimes chiseling when the tooth refuses to budge. One woman brought her husband in and insisted you remove all his teeth so he'd stop biting during arguments. You offered her a discount. By mid-afternoon, your hands are cramping. Your apron is stiff with blood. And you've heard every variation of, "Don't you have anything for the pain?" At least a dozen times. You smile and say, "Yes, it's called being unconscious." The worst are the children. Tiny mouths, huge fear. You hate it. But their parents drag them in, promise them honey cakes afterward, and then look away while you work. You once tried to refuse a job. A nobleman's mistress had a toothache, and she was terrified. You could tell she hadn't slept in days. You said, "Come back tomorrow." The nobleman slapped you with a glove and threatened to have you flogged. You pulled the tooth. Historians still debate whether dentistry was respected or reviled in medieval towns. Some argue it was essential. Others claim it was seen as a last resort, a brutal trade that hovered just above charlatanry. But people always came, because when the pain starts deep, throbbing, relentless, they'll give anything to make it stop. You pack up at dusk, coins in your pouch, sweat in your eyes, your hands are sore, your back aches. You smell like iron and old breath. But your job matters. You've made suffering end, even if only temporarily for a dozen people today. You return home, boil your tools, wipe the blood off the handle of your pliers, sharpen the tips. Because dull instruments make for long extractions. You lie down in your cot. You can still hear the muffled screams in your ears. You wonder how long it'll take before they fade. Probably never. But hey, at least you still have all your teeth. The drums start again. You recognize the rhythm. Slow at first, then faster. The same beat pulsing through the village square, day and night, for 3 days straight. You cover your ears, but it doesn't help. The sound doesn't come from the drums. It comes from the people dancing. Endlessly. Relentlessly. You're a witness to the dancing plague, and whether you're a concerned friend, an overworked guard, or a terrified onlooker, one thing is certain. This is not normal. It started last week. A woman stepped into the center of town and began to dance. No music, no laughter. Just stiff arms, shaking limbs, and a trance-like stare that looked right through you. People gathered to watch, at first amused. But she didn't stop. Not that evening. Not that night. Not even when her feet began to bleed. Then others joined her. 5, 12, 30. Young, old, poor, wealthy. The square became a writhing mass of movement. Clothes torn, hands trembling, eyes wild. Some tried to leave, but their legs wouldn't let them. They danced as if pulled by invisible strings, their faces twisted with exhaustion. You tried to help. Everyone did. The mayor summoned priests. The priests performed exorcisms. Then they called for musicians, thinking maybe a proper rhythm would let the dancers end on a beat. Spoiler, it didn't. Historians still argue what caused this bizarre phenomenon, often called the dancing plague, or Saint Vitus's dance. Was it mass hysteria? Ergot poisoning from mouldy rye? A psychological response to famine and fear? Or something else? Something older, stranger? You don't care what caused it. You just want it to stop. You hold a torch at the edge of the square. Your job is to guide dancers away from walls so they don't break their necks. One man already did collapse mid-spin. The others stepped over him, feet twitching, eyes blank. You haven't slept in 2 nights. The mayor says the dancers must be kept moving until the madness burns itself out. Meanwhile, the rest of the village watches in silence. No one sings. No one laughs. You pass out bread and water. Most can't eat. One girl tried, choked. You carried her to the edge and laid her in the shade, limbs still twitching as if trying to keep time. Here's your bizarre tidbit for the evening. During the 1518 outbreak in Strasbourg, officials actually built a stage and hired musicians to play the sickness out of the afflicted. The city believed the music might exorcise the dancing spirit. It didn't, but it made a great show for the sober. The drummer beside you mutters something about demons. He's tired. Everyone is. You switch places with a neighbor and take a seat, but your body won't relax. You find yourself tapping your foot. Just a little. A tiny beat. You stop, just in case. The sun rises again. Day 4. 2 more dancers collapse. One doesn't get back up. You see the local physician shaking his head. Heart failure, he says, like that makes this any more understandable. You offer cool water to a young man you once fished with. He's soaked in sweat. His knees shake. You see tears on his cheeks. I can't stop, he whispers. You believe him. Historians still debate whether the dancing plague was contagious or purely psychological. Could movement trigger movement? Could fear become rhythm? Could the human mind break so thoroughly that it rewires the body? It's possible. You've seen it now. The dancers don't smile. This isn't joy. It's terror on a loop. Movement without meaning. A loop of limbs and madness. You hear music even when there isn't any. Your neighbor said he dreamed of dancing last night. You didn't tell him you did too. You spend the afternoon building a canopy, some shade, for those still twirling under the sun. One woman's feet are bleeding through her slippers. You gently place a cloth beneath them as she spins past, murmuring something that sounds like a prayer or a curse. No one remembers how it ends. Eventually the dancing slows. The bodies give out. Some recover, some don't. The square goes quiet. No drums, no cries. Just the wind blowing through a space that once pulsed with agony. You're left to sweep the stage, to bury the dead, to sit by the well and stare at your reflection, waiting to see if it starts moving on its own. You pray it doesn't. And tomorrow? You go back to life. Sort of. People don't talk about it. But they don't dance at weddings anymore either. Not for a long, long time. You've eaten nothing but stale crust and tepid water for 2 days. You're wrapped in coarse wool, half mildewed from last week's rain, and your knees ache from kneeling too long. But you don't move. Not yet. Because you're a hermit for hire, and your job is to suffer for other people's salvation. You didn't choose sainthood. It was more like sainthood chose you, because no one else would take the deal. It started when the Lord of the Manor made a generous donation to the church, in exchange for divine favour. What he wanted in return wasn't flashy. No stained glass windows, no new altar, just someone you to wall yourself into a small room and pray. For him, you were given a choice: work the fields with a broken back and no pay, or accept a life of religious solitude, sponsored by a patron who believed that your misery could buy his way into heaven. You chose the wall. Historians still argue whether these anchorites and hermits were holy visionaries or just spiritual scapegoats used by the rich to feel less sinful. Some towns revered them, others mocked them, some even feared them. You are not feared. You are mostly ignored. Your cell is small, 8 feet by 6, with a stone floor, a wooden cot, and a single narrow window. Not to see the world, just to receive bread, water, and the occasional whispered confession from passers-by, too ashamed to enter the chapel. You speak rarely. Your tongue is dry. Your prayers, once loud and full of fire, have shrunk into murmurs that blend with the wind. You count the cracks in the wall, the drips of rain, the sparrows who come and go like little saints of the air. Once a week, the Reeves' daughter brings food. She places it on the ledge, crosses herself, and leaves without a word. Sometimes she leaves herbs. Once, a single fig. That was a feast. You don't see her face anymore. You're not supposed to. Here's your odd fact of the night. Some anchorites were literally bricked into their cells with a ceremony that resembled a funeral. They were considered dead to the world, buried alive for the sake of prayer. People visited their walls like shrines, slipping notes through cracks in hopes of miracles. You haven't performed any miracles, unless surviving on beet broth counts. You once had a name. It's still yours technically, but no one uses it. They just call you the Hermit, or the Holy One, or, once, the Weird Man in the Hole. That one stuck a bit longer than you'd like. You still hear things. Children playing, carts rattling past, birds nesting. But you don't speak. Your voice is reserved for prayers, for whispers into the night, for the Lord, or the stone wall, or whoever's listening. Sometimes people ask for blessings. You raise your hand through the window slot, fingers stiff with cold. They bow their heads. You wonder if it helps. Other times, they leave coins. Not for you, you're not allowed to touch wealth, but for the church, for indulgences, for credit in heaven. You're the interest payment. One man came last month, drunk and sobbing. He confessed to things you'll never repeat. He begged for mercy. You said nothing, just held out your hand. He kissed it, then left. You didn't sleep that night. Historians still debate whether these religious recluses were admired or pitied. Some became local legends, advisors to kings, writers of mystical texts. Others were just forgotten. Their cells crumbled, their names lost, their bones buried where no one bothered to mark. You sometimes wonder which fate is yours. The roof drips in one corner. You shift your cot slightly to avoid the puddle forming. Your knees crack as you move. You wince. Then fold yourself back into position. You whisper another prayer, half out of faith, half out of habit. Outside, someone is singing. A child. The tune is off-key, but joyful. You smile. a rare thing these days. You press your palm against the wall. It's warm from the sun. For a moment it feels like someone is on the other side, pressing back. You know better, but the hope flickers anyway. You close your eyes, mouth the final lines of evening prayer. Sleep takes you slowly, like a tide dragging you under. Tomorrow you'll wake, kneel, listen, endure, and maybe, just maybe, someone will remember your name. The bell clangs with every step. You don't swing it, you wear it. It hangs from a wooden yoke around your neck, tied with rough leather straps that chafe your collarbone. With each footfall, it rings out a hollow warning. Someone unclean is near. You are a leper bell ringer, and your sound means stay away. You walk the edge of town at dawn. The path is familiar now, the road between the weaver's field and the abbey walls. You don't walk near houses anymore. Children scream, dogs bark. Adults, they look through you, like a ghost, like an omen. But you're not dead. Not yet. You carry a staff carved from ash wood and wrapped in cloth. It's not for walking, it's for distance. To point, to gesture, to keep people from getting too close, even if they want to, which of course they don't. You live in the leper house outside the city wall. They call it the lazaretto, a crumbling stone outpost with a sagging roof and a few straw pallets. Some of your companions are worse off, sores so deep you can see bone. Others seem healthy, but bear the mark. Pale skin, numb fingers, aching joints. The priest says it's divine punishment. The physician says it's a humoral imbalance. You say nothing. Historians still argue whether medieval leprosy was the same disease we know today. Hansen's disease or a cluster of unrelated conditions lumped under one terrifying label. Either way, once you're marked, that's it. No cure, no hugs, no home. Your bell rings again as you approach the edge of the market. You don't plan to go in, just near enough to be seen. You hold out a wooden bowl. One baker glances up, then tosses a crust from 5 paces away. It lands in the dirt. You pick it up anyway. You were once a mason. Strong arms, steady hands. You built arches and fireplaces. Now, you can barely grip your staff some mornings. Your fingers feel distant, as if they belong to someone else. Here's a strange tidbit. In some regions, lepers were required not only to wear bells, but also to shout, "Unclean," as they walked. Others wore special clothing. Long cloaks, hoods, gloves meant more to comfort the healthy than protect the sick. You've tried both. They help no one. You remember the day you were told to leave? Your wife cried. Your son didn't understand. The village priest made it sound merciful. A place has been prepared for you, where others like you reside. A spiritual retreat. It sounded almost noble. Almost. The truth was a cart ride in silence, a door that shut behind you, and a bell that hung around your neck before you even had a chance to weep. Now, the bell is part of you. Its sound follows your dreams. You once tried to remove it just for an hour. A passerby saw you panicked, threw a stone, screamed for the guard. You bled from your temple, then walked home in silence. The bell stayed on after that. You sit under an olive tree outside the inn. You won't go closer. But you know the innkeeper will leave a bowl near the fence. Usually soup, sometimes cheese. He never says anything. But once, he left a note tucked under the bowl. I remember you. You built my hearth. It still stands. You cried for an hour. Historians still debate whether lepers were uniformly hated, or if some towns treated them with compassion. There are records of charitable donations, of monastic communities where the sick were fed and bathed, but there are also stories of lepers stoned, chased into forests, or locked in cells. You've seen both sides. A child walks past. She stops, looks at you. You hold still. The bell sways slightly in the breeze. She tilts her head. Then, gently, she waves. You wave back. Her mother yells, grabs her arm, pulls her away. But the child smiles as she leaves. You feel that smile like warmth in your chest. You return to the lazaretto at dusk. The others are gathered around a small fire, speaking softly. One man sings a hymn in a trembling voice. You place your crust on the shared cloth. No one thanks you. No one needs to. You lie on your cot. The wind blows through the cracks in the stone, and your bell rattles faintly where it hangs on the wall. You close your eyes and pretend you're back in the workshop, tools in your hands, dust on your tunic. Your son running in with a crooked grin, asking if the chimney is done yet. You smile, and you dream silent, for once without the bell. The bear is already angry. You can tell by the way it paces slow, deliberate, with the kind of tension that makes your spine itch. Chains rattle as it turns, iron collar tight against its matted fur. You're careful not to make eye contact. You're the animal baiter, and you know the rules. Rule 1. Don't let the bear remember your face. You step into the center of the makeshift ring, just dirt and rope, and the expectation of violence. The crowd presses close, faces eager, hands full of dried meat and bets. This is their entertainment, blood and roars, and the illusion of man's dominance over beast. Your job is to make the bear angrier, to poke, to provoke, to turn this sad-eyed creature into a snarling spectacle, because no one cheers for a passive bear. You hate this part. Historians still argue whether bear baiting began as training for hunting dogs or simply evolved into cruelty for sport. Either way, by the late medieval period, it was full-blown public entertainment. Bears, bulls, even chained apes were pitted against dogs, and sometimes each other, in what towns called baiting pits. Yours isn't even a pit, just a cleared lot behind the alehouse. Today, it's 3 dogs big, heavy-jawed mastiffs bred for brutality versus the bear. She's old. You can see it in her hunched posture, but she's still dangerous. You remember last month, when a dog lost an ear before the crowd even finished placing wagers. You've got a long stick tapered wood, burned at the end to make it sharp. You circle the bear, jabbing just behind the shoulder. Not hard, just enough to irritate, to stir something wild. The bear rears up. The crowd gasps. You step back, heart racing. You've been doing this for 3 years and still haven't learned how not to flinch when 600 pounds of fury stands taller than you. The master signals. The gate drops. The dogs charge. Calzerupts. Barking, growling, dust flying. The bear swats one dog clean across the ring. The other 2 lunge, teeth flashing. You watch, stomach churning, as the old beast turns, snapping, roaring, bleeding already. You keep your distance. Here's your grim little tidbit for the day. Some bears were declawed, or had their teeth blunted to give the dogs a fairer fight. Others were simply starved to make them less aggressive. But this one? She's whole, and she's furious. She bites down on one dog's shoulder. You hear the crunch. The crowd loves it. They cheer, throw coins, stomp their feet. A man behind you yells, "Stick her again!" You ignore him. You've learned to look like you're prodding without actually hurting. It's a delicate dance, appease the spectators. Spare the animal as much as you can. But you're not a hero. You do this for coin. And tonight, you'll carry what's left of the injured dogs back to the kennel, clean the ring, wipe the blood from the ropes, and sleep badly under a tarp that smells like wet fur and fear. You weren't always like this. You once worked with horses, cared for them, fed them, whispered to them in the stables. But the Lord sold his estate. You were left behind. The baitmaster offered a job. You said yes before you knew what that meant. Now your life is the space between the chain and the teeth. Historians still debate whether animal baiters believed in the cruelty of their work or simply saw it as survival. Some records mention baiters weeping after matches. Others describe them as cold, distant. You hover somewhere between. After the fight, the bear limps back to her pen. She breathes heavily. One ear is torn. You offer her a bucket of water. She sniffs it but doesn't drink. You murmur an apology you don't expect her to understand. The baitmaster counts coins, hands you your share. It's more than last week. You feel nothing. On your way home, a child asks if you're the man from the bear fights. You nod slowly. She says, "I hope the bear wins next time." You smile at that. A sad, crooked thing. You reach your tent, wash your hands with cold water, and lie on your back staring at the stars. They look down at you, indifferent. You imagine them looking down at the bear too. Maybe they shine a little brighter over her cage. Maybe not. Either way, you both face the same morning. And the same crowd. The waves slap the hull like impatient hands, and you brace yourself as the ship lurches again forward, then sideways. You've learned to move with it now, knees bent, toes gripping the deck. One stumble on a day like this, and your job ends with a very loud boom. You're a powder monkey, and that's not a nickname you earned. It's the title they give to children who carry gunpowder on warships. You're 12, maybe 13. You've been told not to look too curious, not to talk too loud, and absolutely, under no circumstance, to drop anything. Your job? Run. Back and forth from the magazine, deep in the belly of the ship to the cannons above, with kegs, cartridges, and linen-wrapped packets of black powder tucked in your arms like evil birthday presents. Historians still argue whether powder monkeys were all boys, or if some girls snuck aboard disguised in trousers and caps. The truth? Probably both. Desperation doesn't check gender, and war doesn't care who's fast, as long as you get the boom where it needs to go. Today, the sky is grey, the sea rough, and another ship and enemy looms in the distance. Sailors shout, officers curse, cannons are being primed. You feel it coming. You dash below decks, past barrels, hammocks, and coiled rope. Into the magazine chamber, where one spark means you and everyone around you becomes a cloud of dust and a story no one tells. The room is lit only by a shaded lantern. Shadows sway. You grab 2 canvas bags of powder, pre-measured, sealed tight, and hold them close. Your fingers are shaking, and not from the cold. Back up. The stairs pitch. You almost drop the second bag, but you hold on, because dropping black powder on a deck covered in flint, steel, and friction is how you go out in a flash. A real one. Here's your tidbit for today. In some navies, the magazine boys ran barefoot to avoid creating sparks. Others wore damp cloth around their feet. You? You've gone barefoot so long you've forgotten what shoes feel like. And your feet? Permanently calloused, constantly cold. You reach the cannon, hand off the powder, and retreat. No glory, no cheers. Just another sprint. Back down, back up, again and again. You've memorized the path so well, you can do it in pitch black. And sometimes, you do. Smoke fills the ship mid-battle. You choke, cough, eyes streaming. But still you run. And all the while the cannon crews yell, "More powder!" because they never think about where it comes from. Just that it comes. Fast, hot, dangerous. You once saw what happens when it doesn't. The boy before you, Jacob, he slipped. Just one step. The keg hit the floor and cracked open. No explosion, but the gunner screamed, called him a curse, a waste. By morning, Jacob was gone. You never found out where. Maybe overboard. You learned from that. Now, you tie each bag to your belt with a knot so tight, it takes your teeth to undo it. You whisper the path to yourself. Touch the railing with your left hand every time. It's your charm. Your anchor. You haven't seen land in 2 weeks. You sleep in a hammock near the rudder. The creak of the boards above is your lullaby. The taste of salt your only seasoning. Sometimes you dream of quiet fields, trees, a bed that doesn't swing. But mostly, you just dream of stillness, of a day without running. Historians still debate whether powder monkeys were truly volunteers or coerced children from port towns, orphans, runaways, or kids sold off by desperate families. You don't remember much before the ship, just a hand pushing you forward, and someone shouting, "He'll do." You did. You do. And tomorrow, you will again. Because as long as the cannons thunder, as long as sails snap and captains shout, someone needs to carry the bang. Someone small, fast, careful. Someone like you. The hide hits the stone table with a wet slap, and the smell hits you with equal force. You gag, but only a little. You're used to it now, mostly. You're a tanning assistant, and your entire world is made of blood, guts, and stench. The skins arrive straight from the slaughterhouse, raw, hairy, and reeking. Your job is to turn them into leather, soft, durable, wearable, fit for shoes, belts, armor, or parchment. But first, you have to break them. You pick up the dull, curved blade, not for cutting, but for scraping. You bend over the hide, grip the edge, and begin to shave the flesh side. Bits of meat, fat, and hair curl away. It's like peeling a giant, slimy fruit that hates you. The blade sticks. You press harder. Your arms ache before breakfast. Your back never stops hurting. Historians still argue whether tanning was considered skilled labor or a filthy necessity. Guild records suggest tanners were essential to the economy, but always placed outside the city walls. Out of sight, out of smell. Because the smell? It's permanent. You reek of decay and dung and rot and chemicals. The stink soaks into your skin, into your clothes, into your dreams. You once fell asleep and dreamed of walking through a perfumed meadow. Then you woke up with a sheep hide draped across your chest and flies in your mouth. Speaking of dung, yes, it's part of the process. Once the hide is scraped clean, it gets soaked. First in lime to loosen the hair, then in animal dung to soften it. Cow dung, dog dung, whatever's available. You stir it by hand, bare-handed. It's warm, slippery, and occasionally, something moves. You try not to think about it. Here's your fringe fact for today. Some medieval tanners used animal brains. Yes, brains to condition leather. They believed the natural oils helped soften the skin. You've handled brain mash more times than you'd like to admit. It smells like regret and gelatinized soup. After the soaking comes the beating. You and 2 others lift the hide and drape it over a beam. Then you pound it with wooden mallets for hours, to stretch it, work it, force it to submit. The older tanner calls it taming the beast. You call it arm torture. Once it's dry, you oil it. Maybe smoke it over peat for color. Maybe rub it with lard to keep it supple. Then it's ready to sell. You never get the good coin, though. That goes to the master tanner. You're the kid who ruined his boots last week, trying to chase a runaway goat into the lime pit. You still haven't heard the end of it. You used to think this job was temporary, just until you saved up enough for, what? A cart? A trade? A dream? Now you wonder if you'll ever get the smell off your hands. People avoid you in town. The butcher turns up his nose. The baker gives you day-old crusts for your trouble. Children call you the hide boy. Even dogs seem confused by your scent. But you're necessary. Leather doesn't make itself. Without you, soldiers fight barefoot. Priests write on bark. Nobles sit on straw, not saddles. You just wish someone remembered that. Historians still debate how early tanners coped with the constant exposure to lime and bacteria. Some say vinegar baths. Others say prayer. You say sleep and whiskey. You head home late, clothes stiff, fingers cracked and white with lime burn. You rinse off in the river away from the others, of course. Your skin tingles. Not clean exactly, just less dirty. You lie down on straw that still smells better than you. You dream of rain, washing everything away. Then you wake, and the hides are waiting. The spindle hums like a bored bee. It twirls between your fingers, fast and thin, pulling thread from a puff of carded wool that feels like clouds soaked in dust. You keep your eyes low, your fingers nimble, your posture perfect because mistakes mean starting over. And in the life of a spindle maid, that's the one thing you can't afford. You've been spinning since dawn. Maybe earlier. The fire hadn't even crackled awake when your matron pulled you out of bed and shoved a lump of fleece into your arms. "Today's quota," she said. "That was 4 hours and 100 meters of thread ago, and you're not even halfway done." Spinning looks gentle, graceful even. Those portraits of women by the hearth, serene and noble, their spindles balanced like poetry? Lies. All of it. The truth is, your fingers are blistered, your shoulders ache, your back is so bent you might never walk without a hunch again. And the spindle never, ever stops. Historians still argue whether these spinners were free women earning a living or bonded labourers caught in the cycle of wool, coin and control. The truth? A little of both. You get paid barely. But you're also watched like a hawk. Spinning rooms are silent, save for the sound of threads stretching, twisting, snapping. You tug gently at the wool. Twist, wind, repeat. Over and over. The spindle drops and spins, drawing the fibre into a tight, even cord. You catch it before it hits the floor again, and wind it up like a tiny storm. The supervisor walks past. Doesn't speak. Just glances at your basket. You know what she's looking for. Uniformity, smoothness, speed. You swallow the complaint sitting on your tongue. Your lips are cracked anyway. Here's your strange but true fact. In some households, girls who could spin especially fine thread were considered marriage material. Why? Because if you could master this kind of patience and pain, you'd clearly be a good wife. Romantic, right? You've already had one proposal from the blacksmith's son. You declined. You didn't want to swap wool burns for coal dust. Your hands are slick with lanolin, the natural oil in wool. Some say it's good for the skin. You wouldn't know. Yours are red and raw, dotted with tiny splinters from the distaff. You wrap them in linen when no one's looking. The other girls do the same. It's the only rebellion you get. At midday, you're given a break. 10 minutes. You stretch your legs, eat a hard biscuit, sip lukewarm water from a clay jug. The youngest spindle maid naps against your arm. She's 9, already better at spinning than you were at 12. You wonder how much of her future is already decided. Then it's back to the wheel, back to silence, back to the rhythm that haunts your dreams. The wool gets coarser as the day goes on. You're tired. Your fingers slip. The thread breaks. You groan too loud. The supervisor turns. You feel it coming. She takes your basket, picks up the uneven thread, holds it high. Do it again. Your chest sinks, but you nod, because what else is there? You spin. Spin until the bell rings. You carry your work to the storeroom. Place your skeins in the labelled bin. You don't get praise. Just another basket for tomorrow. You walk home as the sun dips behind the hills. The air is cold, but you keep your shawl tucked tight. Not because you're modest, because your wrists are bruised, and you don't want questions. Historians still debate whether women in the wool trade had agency or were trapped. They were both. You are both. Skilled, essential, and utterly replaceable. You reach your door. Your mother hands you a bowl of soup thin, with one chunk of carrot floating like a lonely ship. You eat. You sleep. You don't dream. Because tomorrow, the spindle waits. And it always wants more. You stand in front of a mirror, holding a tiny brush and a pot of something sticky, dark, and slightly metallic. You dip the brush, part your lips, and begin painting your teeth carefully, methodically, until each one gleams a deep, shiny black. You're a tooth blackener, and in this twisted world of medieval fashion, your job is to make people look wealthy by making their teeth look rotted. It sounds backwards, and it is. But in elite circles, blackened teeth mean sugar, lots of it. And sugar? That's money. Historians still argue whether this fashion originated as a practical concealment of tooth decay or simply a trend that spiraled out of control. What's certain is that in parts of medieval and early modern Asia, Europe, and especially Elizabethan England, black teeth weren't a flaw, they were flaunted. That's where you come in. Your clients are noble women, courtiers, merchants' wives trying to impress their way into the next social tier. They come to you in silks and lace, holding delicate fans and fluttering their lashes right up until they open their mouths. And that's when you get to work. You paint carefully. The mixture is part crushed charcoal, part vinegar, part lead-based powder. You don't tell them that last part. You don't have to. They wouldn't care. Fashion always wins over health. Once, a lady asked if you could add sparkle. You crushed pearl dust into the paste and charged double. She came back next week. Her gums were bleeding. You smiled politely and offered a gentler rinse, which of course cost extra. Here's your disturbing tidbit of the day. In some regions, people intentionally filed their teeth before blackening them, believing it helped the paint stick better. Some even inlaid tiny gold flecks. Beauty, they said. Prestige. You said, hold still. The paste burns slightly. That's normal. You warn them ahead of time. It tingles, you say. Not, it's eroding the enamel from your incisors. But they leave happy, smiling wide, laughing, flashing black teeth like badges of honor. You watch from the shadows and wonder if they'll still be laughing when they can't chew. You used to believe in natural beauty. Your mother was a midwife. She taught you herbs, pastes, how to care for teeth with mint, birch sap, and clean water. But those didn't sell. Decay sold. People didn't want clean teeth. They wanted expensive-looking teeth. The blacker, the better. It meant they could afford sugar, honeyed plums, candied rose petals. If their teeth rotted, so what? They could buy new ones, or at least they could pay you to cover up the damage. Your fingers are stained dark at the tips. Your breath always smells faintly of vinegar and iron. You don't notice anymore. You once tried your own mixture. Just a dab. Just to see. Your lips swelled. Your gums throbbed. You never tried again. But the nobles line up. Coin purses ready. They say, "Make me look like Lady Alice." You say, "Open wide." The side effects? They don't want to hear about those. Tooth loss, jaw infections, poisoned blood, lead madness. One girl fainted mid-application. You caught her before her head hit the stool. Her father gave you a bonus for being so professional. Historians still debate whether blackened teeth were a luxury trend or a social contagion. Something that spread not because it was admired, but because everyone else was doing it. The truth? People will always chase status, even if it means painting poison on their smile. You finish your last appointment near dusk. A merchant's daughter. Nervous, eager. She thanks you breathlessly and hurries off to meet a suitor. You watch her vanish into the mist, lips painted, teeth gleaming like onyx. You close your kit, clean your brushes, fold your cloths. You light a small candle and sit in the silence, smelling ash and vinegar and ambition. You touch your own teeth, still white, still strong. You think about your mother and the mint she used to crush between her fingers. Then you blow out the candle and whisper, "At least I never had to fake it." You stand beside the barrel of boiling water, watching the steam curl like angry ghosts into the morning air. Behind you, villagers gather, whispering nervously. Ahead of you, the accused kneels, hands bound, face pale, not with guilt, but fear. You're the ordeal assistant, and your job is to prepare the suffering that God will use to prove innocence. Justice, medieval style. No jury, no lawyers, just fire, water, rope, and faith, or fear, usually both. The priest nods. You take the iron rod thick, black, freshly pulled from the fire, and set it gently on the wooden bench. It smokes, hissing softly. The accused stares at it, eyes wide. This is trial by ordeal, the belief that divine intervention will show the truth. If you're guilty, the wound festers. If innocent, it heals clean. Simple, brutal, unfair, but official. Historians still argue whether these rituals were ever meant to truly determine guilt, or if they were simply tools of fear and control. Some records suggest even the clergy doubted them. But the people believed. And belief is what keeps the rituals alive. You walk to the cauldron. The water has boiled for an hour. You drop a stone into the bottom. It splashes, disappears. That's the target. If the accused can pull it out without blistering, well, that's up to God. You check the bindings on their wrists. Not too tight, they need to use their hands. Not too loose, they might cheat. Not that it matters. No one escapes the burn. Here's your fringe fact. In some trials, people were weighed against a Bible. Too light? Guilty. In others, they had to walk 9 paces, carrying red-hot iron, then have their wounds checked after 3 days. Infection meant condemnation. Recovery meant grace. You saw a man last month who did recover, or at least didn't get infected fast enough. They called it a miracle. He still lost his farm in the end. The bailiff claimed his innocence fee wasn't paid in time. You hold the accused's hand as they lower it into the water. A hiss. A scream. The scent of burning flesh fills your nose. You don't flinch anymore. That's rule 1. If you flinch, they doubt the process. You count. 1, 2, 3. She pulls her hand out. Skin blistering. Red. Raw. You don't say anything. You simply hold a cloth to the wound, nod at the priest, and step aside. Your part is done. Now it's up to God. You escort the woman back to her home, where she will wait 3 days under lock and key. The priest will return. Inspect the wound. Declare judgment. You've already seen it. She's not healing. You can smell the infection starting. Justice has been decided. But you won't say anything. That's rule 2. Speak only to announce. Never to question. The villagers disperse. Some look relieved. Others suspicious, as if justice might turn on them next. You clean the tools, scrub the rod with vinegar, empty the cauldron behind the church. The water scalds the grass, leaving a blackened patch that never quite grows back. You pretend not to notice. Historians still debate how long trial by ordeal remained in use. Officially banned by the church in the early 13th century, it lingered in backwater villages and whispered traditions long after, because rules are easier to pass than beliefs are to kill. You sleep lightly that night, not from guilt, from memory. The look in her eyes as she screamed, the way she trusted that this would save her. You'd seen it before, you'll see it again. Tomorrow someone will be accused of theft, or blasphemy, or adultery, and the cycle will repeat. The heat, the pain, the silence. Because someone has to hold the iron, and you're good at it. The hearth is cold. Your husband's boots sit by the door, still caked in mud from a week ago. No one's moved them. No one dares. You sit in the corner of your one-room cottage, knees drawn to your chest, apron stained with soot and broth and the kind of grief that never quite dries. You are a forgotten peasant widow, and your job is everything and nothing. No one hired you, no one trained you. You just woke up one morning with a body to bury, a family to feed, and a village that suddenly looked right through you. It doesn't matter how he died. Fever. Farm accident. A fight in town that went too far. The reason vanishes. What stays is the aftermath. You rise early, long before the sun. You chop wood, fetch water, tend the chickens, patch the roof, mend the tunic, scrape together porridge, clean the tools, scare off the fox, braid your daughter's hair, check your son's cough, and then, maybe, if you have a moment, cry in the corner for 10 minutes before someone knocks needing salt or a loan. Your name rarely gets said anymore. People refer to you as her or the widow down the lane. The baker used to call you mistress. Now he grunts when you enter and shortens your loaf. Historians still argue how much legal power medieval widows really had. In some regions, widows could inherit land and run businesses. In others, they were expected to remarry immediately or risk losing everything. Either way, it never quite worked in your favor. You did inherit the farm, but without a husband, the local reeve says you owe work rent instead of coin. So you labor in the barley fields 3 days a week for someone else's grain. The other days? You still have to farm your own plot, or you don't eat. You do the work of two and the sleep of none. You once had neighbors who helped, but help is finite. People move on. They're busy. They see the same black scarf every day and stop asking how you're doing. Here's a quietly tragic tidbit. Some widows were required to wear mourning clothes for life, not just for show but to mark them, visibly, permanently. You've been wearing black so long, even your dreams come in shades of grey. Your eldest daughter helps with the washing. She doesn't ask about her father anymore. Your youngest barely remembers him. You try to keep his memory alive, his jokes, his smell, the way he whistled while threshing, but each year it slips further away, like straw in wind. You were once part of a pair. Now you're just an extra. When you go to church, you kneel alone. When the town throws festivals, you bring bread but aren't asked to dance. When there's illness, people check on the elders, the pregnant, the blacksmith. Not you. You're expected to be fine. You've always been fine, but here's the secret. Sometimes, at night, when the children are asleep and the fire dies low, you whisper to no one. You say your own name, just to hear it out loud. Historians still debate whether peasant women like you had community support or were truly invisible. Both stories are true. You've had a bowl of soup left at your doorstep, and a landlord threaten eviction on the same day. And still, you persist. You wake again. You tie your hair back. You lift your son from his mat and check his cough. You stir the pot with one hand while mending a torn hem with the other. You chase the chicken out of the pantry and kiss your daughter's scraped knee. You carry water. You carry grief. You carry everything. No songs are written about you. No monuments built. But if someone were to sit by your hearth, you'd give them the best bowl of soup you could manage. And you'd say, without sarcasm, you're welcome to stay if you help chop the wood. Because strength like yours doesn't shout. It endures. And now, The fire fades. The last candle flickers, the kettle cools, and the sounds of medieval life, the clanging, the shouting, the whimpers drift away like dust on the breeze. You've walked through fields of rot, stood beside cauldrons, handled blades, carried burdens no one ever praised. You've seen the forgotten, the mocked, the necessary, the men and women who lived in the cracks of history, holding up a world that rarely looked down to thank them. Let it all soften now. Let the heat of the kiln cool, the stink of the dye house fade, the weight of the buckets slide gently off your shoulders. You are not a gong farmer tonight, not a leech collector, not a sign eater or a spindle maid or a widow left behind. You are just you, warm, still, breathing softly beneath your blanket. You've earned this quiet, this moment. Close your eyes and imagine a clean bed, a soft breeze, a sky so clear it hums. No orders, no quotas, no bells to ring or chords to carry. Just breath, stillness, the kind that only comes when no one needs you for anything, at least until tomorrow. Let your chest rise. Let your thoughts float. Let the worst jobs of history fade behind you, like a bad dream melting into dawn. You're safe now. You're home, and you've made it through another story.